It wasn't the explosions that held the horror. It was the silence. The moments between the attack runs, when the roar of the engines faded and the pilot realized he was alone, hanging 5 miles over the Pacific, hunting a ghost fleet with a prayer and a wing full of unstable ordnance. The morning of June 4, 1942, was the moment the Pacific War stopped being about defense and started being about blood-soaked 20-minute miracles. Lieutenant J.G. Wade Skull Hadley, an olive-drab speck in the vast blue of the Pacific, squinted through the plexiglass of his SBD Dauntless dive bomber. The air crackled with tension and static. Below him, the vast expanse of the ocean was empty, mocking the intelligence reports they'd spent 2 days memorizing. Wade flew off the USS Enterprise, part of a mixed strike group tasked with finding the bulk of the Imperial Japanese Navy, SIJN, 1st Carrier Striking Force, led by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo. The Japanese plan, to seize Midway Atoll and lure the crippled U.S. Pacific Fleet into a decisive, annihilating battle, had been compromised. U.S. Navy codebreakers had known the target, the date, and the strength of the enemy. But knowing where they were going and knowing where they were at that very moment were two different things. Wade's mission was search and destroy. His plane, nicknamed Valkyrie, carried a single 1,000-pound general-purpose bomb nestled beneath its belly, its purpose singular: to sink a Japanese carrier. The American launch had been frantic and uncoordinated. Torpedo squadrons, the slow, lumbering TBD devastators, had launched first and headed straight into the teeth of the Japanese Combat Air Patrol, CAP. Wade's dive bomber squadron was late, separated, and flying on fumes. Wade checked his fuel gauge. Low. He checked his rear gunner, a nervous kid named Private First Class Ramirez, who gripped his twin .30 caliber machine guns. "See anything, Manny?" Wade shouted over the engine noise. Ramirez shook his head, his face pale. "Just clouds, sir." The radio suddenly exploded. It was fragmented, urgent, a cacophony of fear and fury. Wade caught snatches. "Fighters on us, taking hits. Look for smoke." The torpedo squadrons were being slaughtered. They were sacrificing themselves, flying straight and low over the water, not because they expected to sink anything, but because their attack would force Nagumo's carriers to maneuver violently, disrupting their ability to launch their own strike. It was a distraction purchased with young lives. Wade pushed his goggles up and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. He banked hard, ignoring the fuel gauge, following a hunch and the last reliable bearing. The vast Pacific suddenly cracked open to reveal the enemy. The sight was breathtaking and terrifying. 4 magnificent aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, steaming in a tight diamond formation. Around them swam cruisers and destroyers, kicking up white wakes. It was the most powerful naval formation in the world. But that was not the shock. The shock was the decks. The decks were clogged. Nagumo, having received an early, inconclusive attack on Midway, had just recovered his first wave planes. He was in the agonizing process of rearming and refueling those planes, stripping off bombs and replacing them with torpedoes for a second strike on the island, only to receive news of the incoming American fleet. Now the hangars below decks were a lethal mix of aviation fuel, stacked ordnance, and armed planes. It was a floating bomb waiting for a match. Wade saw the Combat Air Patrol, CAP, swarming high above, composed of agile Zero fighters. But they were looking down, focused on the low-flying torpedo bombers that had just passed. The Japanese pilots never expected the American dive bombers, the Angels of Death, to be arriving now from 5 miles up and separated from their escorts. "Manny," Wade breathed into the interphone, his voice tight. "They're not ready. We're going in. Target, the Kaga. She looks like the biggest damn target I ever saw." The plunge. The signal came from the senior surviving pilot. "Tally-ho, attack." Wade flipped his dive brake lever. The perforated metal flaps extended from his wings, catching the wind with a tremendous, shuddering roar. The Dauntless nosedived. Gravity took over. The world dissolved into a dizzying rush of speed and noise. The wind screamed in the cockpit, the engine howled, and the sky turned into a dark blue vortex as Wade plummeted towards the tiny white target far below. The Japanese gunners on the Kaga suddenly spotted the black specks falling from the sun. The sky instantly blossomed with black flak bursts and angry tracer fire. The air was a wall of explosive lead. Wade gripped the stick, his knuckles white, fighting the impulse to pull out. He kept the carrier in the crosshairs of his gun sight. He could clearly see the tiny figures of crewmen running across the flight deck, scrambling for cover, the decks glistening with spilled aviation gas. He focused on the white line in the center of the flight deck, the target. The air was rough, buffeted by explosions. His plane jolted violently. "Hold steady, Manny." "I'm praying, sir," Ramirez yelled back, his guns chattering furiously, trying to discourage the Japanese Zeros now plummeting after them. At 2,000 feet, Wade released. He pressed the bomb release handle and pulled back on the stick with all his strength. The Dauntless groaned, pulling a tremendous G-force as it struggled out of the dive. His vision grayed out momentarily. The Miracle and the Inferno. As Wade leveled off and pushed the throttle, his bomb hit. It was not a spectacular flash, but a deep, sickening thud. The 1,000-pound bomb sliced through the Kaga's flight deck and detonated in the packed hangar below. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The ship didn't just burn, it volatilized. The aviation fuel and armed ordnance detonated in a chain reaction. A massive orange-red fireball shot hundreds of feet into the air, consuming the entire midsection of the carrier. Wade could feel the heat and the concussion wave even from a mile away. He looked around. Miraculously, a dozen or so Dauntlesses had made it through the wall of fire. But they hadn't aimed for just one ship. They had hit 3. Almost simultaneously, the USS Enterprise planes hit the Kaga and the Akagi, Nagumo's flagship, and the USS Yorktown planes hit the Soryu. Wade watched in disbelief as 3 of the 4 most powerful aircraft carriers in the world erupted into towering pillars of smoke and fire. Ammunition dumps exploded like slow-motion fireworks, sending flaming debris thousands of feet high. The silence returned, not the silence of the sky, but the silence of the Japanese counterstrike. The enemy planes, armed and fueled below deck, were now part of the inferno. The ships were dead. The strike was cancelled. The Turnwade nursed his battered SBD back toward the Enterprise. The return journey was a gauntlet of angry Zeros and anti-aircraft fire from the remaining Japanese screening ships, but the worst of the battle was over. As he landed on the Enterprise, he looked back toward the horizon. The 3 burning carriers were already listing, their fate sealed. The 4th carrier, the Hiryu, would manage a counterstrike that crippled the USS Yorktown, but she, too, would be found and sunk by American dive bombers before the day was done. Wade and his scattered squadron had achieved what naval strategists had deemed impossible. The sudden, catastrophic destruction of the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy's offensive power. The loss of 4 large fleet carriers and their irreplaceable veteran aircrews was a wound from which the IJN would never recover. The Pacific War, only 6 months old, had just been turned on its head. It was a miracle of timing, code-breaking, and the sacrifice of torpedo pilots, all culminating in 20 minutes of savage, vertical bombing. The Japanese had planned to change the Pacific forever at Midway. It was the Americans who accomplished it.